What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here. This time we're doing a Gurguit deck profile. Finally, something that isn't Aquaforce. So for a while, I've been play testing Gurguit on the side just to kind of like have some fun because I've been kind of like living and breathing Thavas for the past couple months for all these events that have been happening recently. So with play testing with my friends, I came to a build that I actually like and I like to show it off. So let's get right into it. I'm still playing Coil. Right now, Golds, Gurguit in particular, they're only really good starter to use this Coil still. This came from a starter deck, and the Unite skill is a lot easier to do now thanks to the new Grade 3 Gurguit from the GBT10 set, where you can call 2 units, so then this guy can like fetch something else to make your field actually pretty good. It comes in play on your first stride usually when you stride Helios. So like you'll get the superior call from the stride skill and then this can fetch you something else. So that way your Helios first stride turn is actually pretty impactful. You get quad check and you can have some beefy columns to go alongside with it. So that helps in that regard. And then of course the unit that it gets called from him gets a power up of 2k as well. So he's still nifty. For the triggers, I was trying 12 crit at first. As soon as that I found out that I can take out Jerry, I went to 12 crit straight out. Because Gurguit would appreciate the 12 crit pressure at first. Most of the time back before the GBT 13 set, you would go into Glorious Reigning for your power turns. And stands would always be awkward on those turns because you call a new field and all your units are already standing, so you'd rather have crits at that point. But as I kept playtesting, I noticed that the way that Gurguit plays now is not as superior call heavy. And so thus building your field and giving it like some power up, the stands can actually make a difference more than the crits would do, you would think. The fact that you can quad check on Helios gives you a better chance of hitting that stand trigger. And in this case, I decided to use Gigantic Tech Ringer because he can go back to deck. And not to mention that the call unit gets plus 5k on top of that. So it just kind of felt like the right trigger to use. Jerry is actually no longer needed for the counter charging or the soul purpose. So that made room for him. Scarface Line and Flame of Victory are both crits that can go into soul. Scarface has the nifty ability to basically, if you superior call him, you can get a +1 because you're shoving into soul and draw 1 when your Vanguard attacks. Also, when you have like certain units, like Canaris is a grade 2 that gets plus 4k. So Canaris becomes 13k, and if you gave him a power up of 4k by like Carinus, that becomes 17k, which passes the 16k mark. And then having a booster of 4k actually makes it a 21k mark. So it's a really good booster still in that sense to hit 21k first attack, and then your Vanguard attack, and then you swoop him up and draw a card essentially. So you can get a good amount of use for him too. And Flame of Victory, the skill, I hardly use it, but it is there. The soul isn't really an issue, but the +3 can come up sometimes, and I only use that skill if I really need to push for game that turn. Otherwise, I'll be just minusing myself a card from hand, usually. The heal trigger is really clutch. I think the ability to countercharge or soul charge is nice. Gurguit isn't as counterblast heavy as it used to be, so countercharging 1 is actually enough, so you don't have to play like the unflip PG in a sense, so you can play a different PG, because this guy and some of the other cards in the deck actually help out with countercharging in general. And Gurguit doesn't really recycle heal triggers, so you can afford to, bind these and then not care. What does come to mind is the Ghidorah matchup, where the 12 crit might actually come beneficial, but I don't know. I haven't playtested against Ghidorah with Gurguit, but we do have G-Guards. Elise, I think it's her name, the one, the Fighters Collection that flips. She puts a unit into the rearguard circle, and I think it gets around one of either Ghidorah or the grade 4 that prevents calling, Lawless. So that might be played around with that way, and so having the strand triggers are still beneficial in a sense. But other than that, Kagero isn't such a big deal, because you'll call your units anyway next turn. And I do play a few resist units that can help where you can stack all these triggers onto it so the last attack isn't wasted because, you know, they have Denial Griffin. But if you have something with resist, then Denial Griffin is useless and then they have to actually drop some guard for it. So yeah. With Chaos, I played the grade 3 as well, so that way you unlock your field and then you can call your stuff and your stand triggers are still useful in that sense too. For the grade 3s, we're playing 7 grade 3s. This is the grade 3 version of the Gurguit we got back in GBT 10, Golden Holy Sword Gurguit. He has a nifty stride skill where you can Counter Blast and Soul Blast, and if you call something with Unite, you can call something else in Rest. So that easily triggers your Unite requirement for the turn, thus you can save cards in hand. So you could just build up your hand for defensive purposes. The GB2 skill is really useful too with guarding certain stuff that you're done with, and sometimes you need to make room to trigger Unite again once more for the next turn. So you might as well use some units on your field to intercept from the back row or use your regular intercepts at that point. It also kind of helps getting around cards like Guard Restrict too, so you can get some decent shield from that too. And then sometimes it saves you a card from the hand, which could matter in the long run. The other grade 3 run is Militant Act Dragon. This guy is basically the Link Joker counter where you basically, when your G unit strides, and it's a Vanguard or Rearguard skill, so this guy could be a Rearguard, but usually you're going to write him as Vanguard. You basically bottom deck everything besides the Vanguard, regardless if it's locked or not, and if you return 1 or more, then you can call 2 from the top 3, and then bottom deck the rest. So he can trigger Unite on top of that, which is actually pretty useful. So this is basically your Link Joker counter. If you write him, it's not horrible, but not great. But the fact that you can strike Helios and Law Gurguit with, you know, them having the Gurguit names, it's okay. So, not bad. Could be worse. Could be running Ezel still. Now for the grade 2s. This is the biggest variation I've noticed with Gurguit over the past few years. The grade 2 lineups are usually not that identical throughout players. There are some different preferences and a lot of meta calls, I guess, go into it as well. So I know some of you are probably asking, so why no Paramore? Why no Powell? Why no Doggy? Those kinds of cards. So let me explain. With Canaris, I was playing him at 3 and I bumped him up to 4. He has 2 skills, so he has like a dual purpose. The Unite skill gives him a +4 if you have a Gurguit Vanguard, which you always will. And so it makes him a 13k beat stick, so it's past the 11k mark by himself. If you give him +4 with a grade 1 like Karanis, it makes him into a 17k, so he's past the 16k mark. And then, like I said, if you give him an additional 4k either by boosting or another power-up, then he's a 21k line. So that can become easily a big beat stick. So thus, Canaris is good in that too. And I know some of you can say, well, the Doggy does the same thing. But the Doggy only does that with his second skill, it's GB1. When he's placed on Rearguard, you can check the top 3 by discarding a card, of course. And you call something and bottom deck the rest. You can call it anywhere on top of that. So the thing that I like about him is that you can call it to any Rearguard circle compared to Paramore, where Paramore calls it behind, and you have to rely on a booster to really make the best out of that Paramore call in a sense. You could also try to use Karinas to return that unit, but you rather not have to worry about that. And I think with Karinas, it's a little bigger boost that can hit some numbers pretty easily compared to Paramore, where it's just a +2 on Unite, so it's an 11k. The other thing that I like about Canaris is that during your Law Gurguit turns, because you'll call during the battle phase, if you call this guy, you can discard the card to call something else and potentially keep superior calling with other units like Herinus or another copy of himself, further extending your attacks, and it could be the final push that you really need too. I hardly use the superior calling skill unless I really need to, and it's usually for that final turn, a sense. Sometimes I might use it if I have a big enough hand and it's to rip like 2 cards or more from the opponent, then I might consider doing it. So that's something to think about. Just because a unit has a skill doesn't mean you have to use it. So Usually Canaris is there for like the beat stick purposes, and it makes nice numbers. And of course he has Unite on top of that. To go along with the power-ups, Solonis is really good. I am very surprised that 2k blanket to all of your units hits numbers pretty easily. And what I mean by that, if you have like a generic grade 3 with a 7k booster, that's an 80k line. So with those units getting +2, it's a +4 to the column. Now your 18 became a 22 column just by having him on board on the other side, which is what? Easy 21k mark. The same thing with Canaris. If you had like a booster, and this sometimes passes the number 2 to help you get through past 21k easily. The fact that he helps with that is pretty big. The second skill is really crucial too. At the beginning of the guard step that your Vanguard with Gurguit in the name was attacked, you could put this card into your soul, and if you do, call 2 cards at the top of your deck. So specifically, 2 things. He feels soul. The second thing is that he calls 2 cards to the Guardian Circle, which means your Unite condition is met during your opponent's turn, which could matter, especially if you're wanting to use Gurguit's GB2 skill without dropping a card or 2 from your hand. So that matters, and it's pretty neat. I think 3 is the right number. 4 might be too much, because if you have him in 2 columns, it can be a little awkward sometimes. So you'd rather have other units like Canaris, Henriness, or Reagan, or some other thing to go alongside with it, because they can be bigger. Also, because he's +2k to the whole thing, he becomes an 11k. So you can re-stand him with a stand trigger and still can hit the Vanguard, which is pretty good. So with Henriness and Reagan are, I guess you can call my tech choices. So the story with Henriness is he's a unit that can call something else. That's the main purpose, really. Before, it was to help with Unite in the main phase, but it also helps with setup. So on your Helios stride turns, you really don't mass superior call at all that turn, except for your stride skill and maybe this guy and this guy, or you would call from hand. So having a unit like this to help out build some kind of a field, then this is greatly appreciated. And if you have a Gurguit Vanguard, this unit and then the unit call gets +3. So 7k can become 10k boosters. He becomes a 12k. So if you put a 7k booster behind it, it instantly becomes a 22k line as well. And if you have Solinus on the other side, those 2 units get +2, so +4 to the column. So that makes it a 26k column too. So very synergetic. The other thing is that it's like, I was trying Paul, which is the Amber clone, where you can boost, counterblast 1, call something. Paul became a little bit awkward sometimes, especially if you have this guy on the other side, and if you called something over him, then you will lose the power up, unless you put this guy behind the Vanguard and then just have him there for the constant +2. But that might not be ideal, and sometimes you really didn't want to use Paul just yet until the actual Law Gurguit turns, which is like your 3rd stride essentially at that point. But having the flexibility of Henriness on the Law Gurguit stride turn, it kind of works out the same way, except that he's more flexible, so he can call to the other rear guard circle. And again, if you call another copy of him or Canaris, you could further extend the superior calling. So I can get pretty much the same value during the Law Gurguit turn with him, and then prior, he can help me get the pieces I need to build an effective field for Helios turns. Reagan is something I call a compromise. What I mean by that, she has Unite, which the skill of that is if you have a grade 4 or greater Vanguard, this gets +3k. It's a 12k beater, basically. And the other skill is Resist. So the compromise is that I did want some kind of resist, so that way I could stack my triggers and not have worried about being spent by head or around or denial griffin in a sense. And it can give some control decks a little hard time to deal with a little bit. They have to like attack it or something like that, or the other ways. And the fact that there are other units like Marcia is an 8k that also has resist, and she goes into Soul and can countercharge, which is good, but like I said, Gurguit doesn't really need to countercharge as much as it used to. So having that extra 4k power difference actually makes much more of a difference. An example is that Reagan's 12k, and if you use Karina's +4, she's 16k by that. If you have Solonis, then Reagan with a 7k booster, that's a 19k line by itself, and then Salonis gives a +4 to the column, making it a 23k line, which is pretty good too. Another example is with Reagan with a Horsa as the booster, and if you superior call once, it's a +4 to the column. Then with Salonis, it's another +4. So that 19k became a 23k. That 23k then became a 27k mark line. So it also still hits numbers where if Marcia was played instead, then you'll be 4k short and you have to work extra for the extra 4k to pass those thresholds, basically. And if she got +3 from like Henriness or from Coel or something, actually from Henriness he gives +3, or the Flame of Victory crit, that's what I was thinking. She becomes a 15k beater, and then with a 7k booster, just vanilla, it's a 22k line still. So good numbers. So how this ended up being is that I was actually playing 3 of this, 2 of this, and then of course 2 paw with this kind of ratio. And I ultimately caught off paw and then added the 4th and added the 3rd copy here. And so far it's been working for me. If I were to change this to another unit, I might consider the doggy. But that resist actually is kind of relevant, especially with the top decks having some form of control. Whether it's spinning or retiring or even locking, this can actually put in some work as well. On to the grade 1s. So for PG, I am playing Alicia still. The one thing that she's neat is that you can superior call her to the Guardian Circle from your deck using like Slay Me or even Elise. And you can PG, basically. And also, she has the flexibility of the second skill where it's a Unite skill. You can put it on the Guardian Circle, bottom deck one of your rear guards, and it gets +15 shield for the battle. So you can actually protect 2 things at once. You can protect the rear guard with a 15k shield, and then you can perfect guard for the Vanguard if multiple units were being attacked. So that's one thing you can do. Also, since it bottom decks one of the units, if you're going against like D-Police and they have a Laurel that needs to hit, basically, you just bottom deck the unit by just doing her skill, and it's just like it's not gonna hit. So little things like that. I have considered the new one, the Liberator PG, where you can basically unlock some stuff and call something. That is also an option. I haven't felt the need that I needed it. If you're going into a tournament and your locals or tournament is like Link Joker heavy and you decide to go and playing with Gurguit, then I would recommend that PG instead. It'll probably do more work in those matchups, especially against Chaos and somewhat Messiah as well. With the Stride Fodder, I kind of did something risky. This is only 3 Stride Fodder and only 7 grade 3s, so there's 10 cards you can pay the cost of Stride with 1 card, essentially. And this deck doesn't have any draw triggers, so I am relying to making sure I see the right grade 3 and, of course, Striding and all that kind of stuff. But the reason that I bumped it down to 3 is to fit, like, these cards still. And to be honest, I guess I could reduce this and make it like that. But like I said, this is mainly for fun, and I've been like playtesting with my friends, and this is what I feel like is still pretty good. So with Corinus, why is this guy at 4? I want to see him. Whether I call it from hand or I superior call him, Corinus is a really good card. So I remember having my first thoughts video about this guy, and I'm like, he's got to fight over Jeffrey, basically, and Horsa, because these are kind of like, can't go. And ultimately, he took Jeffrey out because he draws a card still, and Jeffrey draws a card. And then the additional skill in it, it countercharges. It gives +4 to something else. So it's like, wow, that's really good. You bottom deck something, so you're recycling something back to your deck. Then you draw a card, so your hand is actually building. And you give something +4, so you can make units like, again, like Regan hit 16k. Canaria is hitting that 16k threshold already that way, and you could just keep beefing it. So he's definitely really good, and I want to see him. Horsa is still valuable as he can make power columns. You don't superior call a lot, but he can make that extra +4k count, like I mentioned before with the Reagan column and so on. It can help easily make that 26k threshold, and then of course when you do Glorious Reigning, you can get that massive power up of 16k in total because he'll see 4 other rear guards. So if you just had a 16k column like 7 and 9, plus another 16 makes a 32k column, which is really good. So he's still useful in that regard. And he also has Unite, so that way you can call another unit with the stride skill of Gurguit as well. The other thing you can do with him is that you can put him behind Vanguard on top of that, and you can make the Helios swing really big. Helios is already swinging 51k, quad check, and no grade 1s or higher. So with having the potential additional 11k power up, it becomes like a 62k line. So that's pretty good. Onto the strides. That's a lot of Gurguit. So first off, Helios. Like I said, he gets quad check, and it's not GB restricted, so you can do it first stride. And his second skill is GB3. When he attacks, he gets 5k for every regard you have, so he could potentially easily become 51k. And then he has the guard restriction of no grade 1s or higher from hand to Guardian Circle during the battle he attacked. So it's a really good card in my opinion. I think this is actually what Gold's actually needed for a while, because first striding a lot of Gurguit hurt because you have to discard, and sometimes discarding would hurt. And you want to generate advantage first stride as well, especially against like the top decks. So if you're going against Skiers, for example, or Night Rose, or Thavas, or Overlord, like they're all advantage gaining and putting pressure on you. So you want to fight that way back too. Also, the fact that he has Gurguit in the name is huge. So go into Law Gurguit. Law Gurguit is Counterblast, discard a card, and flip a copy of himself. And he gets the Ret Tech skill, where it's a Unite skill. On attack, check top 7, call something. And also, your units continuously get plus 2k for every Gurguit face up in the G zone. So if you go through for Helios and flip for him, for the first Law Gurguit, you'll get 5 Gurguit names face up. So plus 2 times 5, 10k. So every unit, including the Vanguard, gets that 10k power up. So it's great also on multi-attacking. That's why I was actually playing Powell for a while. Try to get that extra attack and extra poke. But if you can do the superior call on his call, you can call Henriness or Paramore to further extend the superior calling. It's almost like Negro Songer in Night Rose in a sense, where the Vanguard is actually extending your attacks during the battle phase, so that's good. The second pair is there just in case you can't really finish them off with the first Law Gurguit after going through the 4 Helios, so then you basically just go to the second one and they should be done. And it's just a counterblast, so it's not that heavy of a cost. The other thing to note with the other Gurguit stride, I hardly use him, but if your opponent's at 5 damage and they don't have a PG, and they may have like a bunch of like 10Ks, maybe some heals or something like that, you can go into him and make big ass columns with him. If you can do his skill 2 or 3 times, that's huge. Of course, that takes like 3 counterblast and 6 soul, or you can do 2 counterblast and 4 soul. But still, if the timing is right, you can just like beat them down with brute force essentially. And if you get a stand trigger, you'll get even more benefit from it. But I don't know. I honestly have felt like I want to cut this out for a Sabreeze, but I could also remove a G Guardian because I am playing 5 G Guards. So I don't know. I'll still have to play around that. Competitively, I would probably definitely go with Sabreeze. So either replace this card or another G Guard for Sabreeze for sure, in terms of competitive play. Notice all these are Gurguits. They all kind of have like their useful cases. So this is like beat down with brute force. This is extending multi-attack. This is like guard restriction, and of course quad check. So when you come into a scenario where one is definitely going to be beneficial than the other, or vice versa, then it's flexible in that sense. And again, they're all Gurguit in the name, so that helps a ton. Glorious Reigning Dragon definitely got cutting down from 4 to 2. You just don't go into him as often as you would think prior to GB13. And the good thing about him, though, is that once you get enough cards face up in the G zone, you can superior call whole field entirely. And like I said, you'll abuse Horsa in that sense, and you can get 16k power-ups easily. And then The only conflict is when the stand triggers come into play. But he doesn't come up as often, so I don't worry don't worry too much about it. And he might be the right call if your hand's kind of like low and shit. And with the grade 3 straight skill, you can get the 2 units to bottom deck and then get a feel, and you'll get to counter charge and soul charge, of course. So he refunds himself and then fuels for soul in case you want to go into radiant right after, or just use the soul for other stuff in general. Good strides overall. The other thing to mention about Helios, the fact that you can swing with a column first, then attack with Vanguard, hitting that stand trigger can restand that rearguard attack, and if you get a second stand, you can stand the booster essentially. But the fact on Helios turns, you have big rearguards hitting typically over the 21k mark. So restanding one of those, either 16k beat 6 or 21k beat 6 on their own, it just a massive gain and could push the extra damage. So you potentially have 3 to 4 solid attacks on a Helios, with along going with the quad check to give you that +1 already on top of that. The other thing to emphasize more on Gurguit, whatever he calls will usually get the +10k. So if you call grade 1, that's a 7k, like a Strike Fighter, it's a 17k poker. If you call a Scarface, it becomes a 14k attacker, and then if you have Solonis on the other side, it gets that +2k, making it a 16k poker, which is good. Onto the G-Guards. You have Elise right here. She's from the Fighters collection, where she can flip another G-Guard, so it gets you faster, higher face-up cards in the G-Zone. Good for Glorious Reigning, and also you can basically move the called Guardian to one of your circles, so that can help out sometimes if you get like a Scarface line. You can call it here, not call it, but move it here, and then you can use the GB2 skill of Gurguit to guard with it as a 10k shield for the next battle or something. Or if it's an important unit, you can use it for the next turn for Helios or Gurguit, just to set up your turn much easier. So it's pretty good, in my opinion. So having the 2 can come in clutch. Slimy is really good too. You can bottom deck one of your rear guards and then call something, 2 cards. It reminds me like a Negronora, so you get the 41k power up total. So you have to pass the 41k mark in order to hit Vanguard. If you get a 10k and a 5k shield from the top deck stuff. So it's pretty good. The other thing about Rhea, she is the 5k. If you have 2 or more rear guards, you get 5k. It's very simple. It's debatable which one I would take out for Sabreeze. Either one of these are actually eligible to take out. It just depends if I really need the second Elise or the second Slimy, or if I even need Rhea at all. But Rhea is key because she's free, and then Slamy's good because he's also free, but he recycles something, but then you can get something to guard higher, but maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe this is easier, or at least it's a counterblast, so you kind of have to like give or take at that point. So yeah, that's my Gurguit Dark profile. It's something that I play on the side for fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave a like, comment down below, share with your friends, and subscribe. Thank you. See ya.